My dear seekers of truth, I am Sigmund Freud, and today I must share with you a revelation that will fundamentally alter your understanding of what you call manifestation. For decades I have observed countless individuals desperately attempting to manifest their desires through positive thinking, visualization, and affirmations, only to find themselves trapped in cycles of frustration and self-doubt. They light their candles, recite their mantras, and create their vision boards with religious devotion, yet their deepest desires remain as elusive as shadows in the night. The pain in their eyes speaks volumes about the spiritual emptiness they feel, the gnawing sense that something fundamental is missing from their practice. They blame themselves, believing they lack faith or commitment, when in reality they are fighting a war against an invisible enemy that dwells within the darkest recesses of their own psyche. Tonight I will illuminate the psychological mechanisms that have been undermining your manifestation efforts from the very beginning, revealing how your unconscious mind has been working against your conscious intentions with surgical precision. The techniques I am about to share represent the culmination of a lifetime spent exploring the human psyche, combined with spiritual insights that will bridge the gap between psychology and mysticism in ways that will revolutionize your entire approach to creating reality. Before we begin this journey into the depths of your unconscious mind, I want you to pause for a moment and truly connect with what you are about to discover. Take a breath and allow yourself to be present with me in this sacred space of learning and transformation. The fundamental error that most manifestation teachers make lies in their complete ignorance of the unconscious mind and its profound influence over human behavior. They operate under the naive assumption that conscious desire alone is sufficient to create change, when in fact the unconscious mind contains a vast repository of contradictory beliefs, suppressed emotions, and unresolved conflicts that actively sabotage every manifestation attempt. Consider the case study of a patient I once treated, a woman who desperately wanted to manifest financial abundance, but found herself inexplicably drawn to financial self-sabotage at every turn. Through careful analysis, we discovered that her unconscious mind associated wealth with the abandonment she experienced as a child when her wealthy father left the family. Her psyche had created an unconscious equation: money equals abandonment, therefore to manifest money would be to manifest abandonment. This is not mere superstition or mystical thinking, but rather the logical operation of psychological defense mechanisms that were established in early childhood to protect the ego from perceived threats. The unconscious mind does not distinguish between past and present, between reality and imagination, between symbolic and literal threats. It operates according to its own internal logic, which often directly contradicts our conscious intentions and desires. When we attempt to manifest something that triggers an unconscious conflict, we create what I term psychological resistance, a phenomenon that manifests as inexplicable obstacles, self-sabotaging behaviors, and a persistent feeling that we are fighting against an invisible force. This is because we literally are fighting against ourselves, against the protective mechanisms of our own psyche that have been programmed to keep us safe by maintaining the status quo, even when that status quo no longer serves our highest good. The manifestation process, when properly understood through psychoanalytic principles, reveals itself to be far more complex and nuanced than the oversimplified approaches currently popular in spiritual circles. True manifestation requires what I call unconscious alignment, a state where the conscious desire and unconscious programming work in harmony rather than opposition. This cannot be achieved through mere positive thinking or surface-level affirmations, but requires a deep excavation of the unconscious material that is creating internal conflict. The dreams that visit you in the night are not random neurological firing, but rather the royal road to understanding these unconscious dynamics. When a person dreams of losing money immediately after attempting to manifest wealth, this is not coincidence but rather the unconscious mind expressing its fears and resistance to the manifestation process. Similarly, when someone experiences anxiety or depression during manifestation practices, this is not a sign of spiritual weakness but rather the psyche's attempt to communicate important information about unresolved psychological material that must be addressed before true manifestation can occur. The body itself becomes a canvas upon which these unconscious conflicts are painted, manifesting as physical symptoms, chronic illnesses, and energetic blockages that seem to have no logical cause but make perfect sense when viewed through the lens of psychoanalytic understanding. Let me pause here for a moment and create a space for genuine connection between us. I want to know if you have ever felt truly heard in your spiritual journey, if anyone has ever acknowledged the depth of your struggle with manifestation in a way that made you feel understood rather than blamed. In the comments below, I invite you to share your experience by writing something simple like this: "Yes, I have felt blocked in my manifestation practice and I am ready to understand why." When you take this small action of writing in the comments, you are not merely interacting with content, but rather participating in a therapeutic process that begins to shift your relationship with your own unconscious material. The very act of acknowledging your struggles publicly creates what we call conscious recognition, the first step in bringing unconscious material into the light of awareness where it can be properly addressed. Additionally, when you comment, you become part of a community of seekers who understand the real challenges of spiritual development, creating a supportive environment where authentic growth can occur rather than the superficial positivity that pervades so much of the manifestation community. This is not just about engagement or algorithm performance, but about creating genuine therapeutic value for every person who chooses to participate honestly in this process of self-discovery and healing. Now, let us delve deeper into the specific psychological mechanisms that create manifestation blocks, beginning with what I term the prosperity complex. This complex forms in early childhood when a child observes the relationship between their parents and money, absorbing not only conscious teachings about wealth but also unconscious attitudes, fears, and beliefs that become deeply embedded in the psyche. The child who witnesses their parents fighting about money will unconsciously associate financial abundance with conflict and relationship destruction, creating an internal prohibition against manifesting wealth that operates completely below the threshold of conscious awareness. Years later, as an adult, this same individual may consciously desire financial freedom, while unconsciously sabotaging every opportunity that presents itself, driven by the childhood programming that equates money with danger to their most important relationships. The complexity of this dynamic becomes even more pronounced when we consider the layers of generational trauma that influence these unconscious patterns. A family line that has experienced poverty, persecution, or financial trauma will pass these psychological imprints down through the generations, creating what Jung called ancestral complexes that influence behavior across multiple generations. The grandchild of Holocaust survivors, for example, may find themselves unable to manifest abundance despite having no conscious memory of the original trauma, because their nervous system has inherited the survival programming that associates visibility and wealth with mortal danger. This is not mystical speculation, but rather well-documented psychological phenomenon that can be observed in families across cultures and historical contexts. The relationship complex represents another fundamental barrier to successful manifestation, particularly for those seeking to manifest romantic love or deeper intimacy. This complex forms through early attachment experiences with primary caregivers, creating internal templates for how relationships should function that often directly contradict the qualities we consciously desire in partnership. A person who experienced inconsistent love and attention as a child may find themselves unconsciously attracted to partners who recreate these same patterns of inconsistency, even while consciously attempting to manifest stable, loving relationships. The unconscious mind seeks familiarity above all else, because familiarity equals safety in the primitive logic of the survival brain. Therefore, we often manifest not what we consciously desire, but rather what feels unconsciously familiar, even when that familiarity is associated with pain, disappointment, or unfulfillment. The manifestation of healthy relationships requires not just visualizing the perfect partner, but rather healing the original attachment wounds that created these unconscious templates for love. This healing process involves bringing conscious awareness to the ways in which we unconsciously recreate our earliest relationship dynamics, and gradually reprogramming the nervous system to recognize healthy love as safe rather than threatening or unfamiliar. Career and purpose manifestation blocks often stem from what I call the achievement complex, a psychological structure that forms around early messages about worthiness, success, and personal value. Many individuals develop unconscious beliefs that they do not deserve success, that achievement requires sacrifice of their authentic self, or that pursuing their true purpose will result in rejection or abandonment by their family or social group. These beliefs create internal conflicts that manifest as creative blocks, self-sabotaging behaviors in professional settings, and a persistent sense of being stuck or unfulfilled despite possessing obvious talents and abilities. The case of the artist who dreams of creative success but finds themselves unable to complete projects reveals the operation of unconscious guilt around claiming their own creative power, often rooted in family dynamics where creativity was seen as impractical, selfish, or threatening to family stability. Similarly, the entrepreneur who repeatedly creates businesses that fail just before achieving breakthrough success may be unconsciously protecting themselves from the visibility and responsibility that comes with true success, based on childhood programming that associated leadership with danger or isolation. Health manifestation represents perhaps the most complex intersection between psychological and spiritual healing, because the body serves as both the canvas upon which unconscious conflicts are expressed and the vehicle through which healing must ultimately occur. What we call psychosomatic illness is not imaginary sickness, but rather the body's attempt to communicate psychological truths that cannot be expressed in any other way. The person who manifests chronic fatigue after years of overgiving in relationships is not malingering, but rather expressing through their body the deep exhaustion of their spirit that has been denied conscious recognition. The individual who develops digestive issues while attempting to manifest abundance may be expressing the unconscious belief that they cannot properly digest or metabolize good things in their life, that they are somehow unworthy of nourishment and sustenance. These physical manifestations are not obstacles to spiritual growth, but rather profound communications from the unconscious mind that, when properly interpreted, provide essential guidance for the healing process. The integration of body, mind, and spirit in manifestation work requires developing what I call somatic awareness, the ability to listen to and interpret the subtle messages that the body provides about our unconscious psychological state. The phenomenon of spiritual bypassing represents one of the most insidious obstacles to authentic manifestation, occurring when individuals use spiritual practices to avoid confronting difficult psychological material, rather than integrating it. This creates a false spiritual identity that appears enlightened on the surface, while remaining fundamentally disconnected from the authentic self and its genuine needs and desires. The person who claims to have transcended all material desires while secretly harboring deep resentment about their financial struggles is not practicing genuine spirituality, but rather using spiritual concepts to maintain psychological defenses against their own humanity. True spiritual development requires what I call integrated consciousness, a state where spiritual insights are grounded in psychological honesty and emotional authenticity, rather than used as escape mechanisms from the challenges of human existence. This integration process involves developing the courage to face our shadow material, those aspects of ourselves that we have disowned or repressed because they do not align with our spiritual self-image, and learning to include rather than transcend our humanity in our spiritual practice. Modern neuroscience has begun to validate many of the insights I developed through clinical observation nearly a century ago, particularly regarding the role of the unconscious mind in shaping behavior and experience. Research on neuroplasticity demonstrates that the brain can indeed be reprogrammed through conscious intervention, but this reprogramming must address the deeper neural patterns that were established in early childhood, rather than simply adding new positive thoughts on top of existing negative programming. The work of trauma researchers like Bessel van der Kolk confirms that traumatic experiences become encoded not just in memory, but in the very structure of the nervous system, creating automatic responses that operate below the threshold of conscious awareness. These findings provide scientific validation for the psychoanalytic understanding that lasting change requires addressing unconscious material at its source, rather than attempting to override it through willpower or positive thinking alone. The manifestation method I propose integrates classical psychoanalytic techniques with modern understanding of consciousness and energy to create what I call depth manifestation, an approach that works with rather than against the unconscious mind to create authentic and lasting change. This method begins with dream analysis, using the symbolic language of dreams to understand the unconscious dynamics that are influencing your manifestation attempts. By keeping a dream journal and learning to interpret the metaphorical messages that arise during sleep, you begin to develop a direct communication channel with your unconscious mind, allowing you to identify and address the specific psychological material that is creating manifestation blocks. The process continues with free association, a technique where you allow your mind to wander freely around your manifestation desires, noting what thoughts, feelings, memories, and sensations arise without censoring or judging them. This seemingly simple practice reveals the complex web of associations that surround your desires in the unconscious mind, helping you understand why certain manifestation attempts feel effortless while others create intense resistance or anxiety. The technique of transference analysis involves examining your relationship with spiritual teachers, manifestation gurus, or even the manifestation process itself to understand how early relationship patterns may be influencing your spiritual development. Many individuals unconsciously transfer their unresolved parental relationships onto their spiritual practice, seeking from manifestation techniques the unconditional love and acceptance they never received from their caregivers. This creates an impossible situation where manifestation becomes a desperate attempt to earn love rather than an expression of inherent worthiness, guaranteeing frustration and disappointment. By recognizing and healing these transference patterns, you free yourself to engage with manifestation from a place of wholeness rather than need, dramatically increasing your success and satisfaction with the process. Resistance interpretation represents another crucial element of depth manifestation, involving the careful examination of everything that seems to oppose your manifestation efforts. Rather than viewing resistance as something to overcome or push through, depth manifestation recognizes resistance as valuable information about unconscious conflicts that require attention and integration. When you find yourself procrastinating on taking action toward your goals, feeling anxious about your manifestation practice, or experiencing persistent self-doubt, these experiences are not signs of weakness but rather communications from the unconscious mind about unresolved psychological material that is seeking conscious recognition and healing. By developing the skill to interpret rather than judge your resistance, you transform obstacles into allies in your manifestation process. The practice of conscious regression involves deliberately accessing earlier memories and experiences to understand how current manifestation blocks were formed and what healing they require. This is not about dwelling in the past or blaming your parents, but rather about developing compassionate understanding of how your survival strategies were formed and how they may no longer serve your current growth and expansion. Through careful exploration of your earliest memories around money, relationships, success, and worthiness, you begin to separate your authentic desires from the protective mechanisms that your psyche developed to keep you safe in your original environment. This separation allows you to honor the wisdom of your survival strategies while consciously choosing new patterns that support rather than sabotage your manifestation efforts. Integration work represents the culmination of depth manifestation, involving the conscious synthesis of unconscious material with spiritual aspiration to create authentic alignment between your deepest self and your manifestation practice. This is not about eliminating your humanity in service of some idealized spiritual identity, but rather about embracing your full complexity as a human being who contains both light and shadow, wisdom and confusion, strength and vulnerability. When manifestation arises from this place of integrated authenticity, it becomes an expression of your true nature rather than an attempt to compensate for feelings of inadequacy or unworthiness. The results of this approach are not only more satisfying but also more sustainable, because they are rooted in genuine self-knowledge rather than fantasy or spiritual bypassing. The depth manifestation approach recognizes that true spiritual development is not about transcending your humanity, but rather about fully embodying it with consciousness and compassion. This means honoring your desires as sacred expressions of your life force rather than treating them as spiritual obstacles to overcome. Your longing for abundance, love, creative expression, and meaningful work are not signs of spiritual immaturity but rather the voice of your soul calling you toward your highest potential. When you learn to work with your unconscious mind rather than against it, manifestation becomes a natural and effortless expression of your authentic being, rather than a struggle against invisible psychological forces. The practice of depth manifestation requires patience, courage, and commitment to your own growth and healing. Unlike quick-fix approaches that promise instant results, this method acknowledges that lasting transformation occurs gradually as you develop genuine relationship with your unconscious mind and learn to integrate previously rejected aspects of yourself. The process is not always comfortable, as it requires facing difficult truths about yourself and your history, but it leads to genuine freedom rather than temporary relief or spiritual inflation. As you develop skill in working with your unconscious material, you begin to experience what I call authentic empowerment, a sense of personal agency that is grounded in self-knowledge rather than fantasy or denial. Your journey toward manifestation mastery is not a destination, but rather an ongoing process of deepening relationship with yourself and your creative potential. Every block you encounter, every resistance you experience, every seeming failure in your manifestation attempts, contains valuable information about your unconscious dynamics and opportunities for deeper healing and integration. By approaching these challenges with curiosity rather than judgment, you transform your manifestation practice into a powerful tool for psychological and spiritual development that serves your growth long after your initial desires have been fulfilled. I want to acknowledge how challenging this journey can be, especially when you have been trying to manifest positive changes in your life for months or even years without success. The path I have outlined tonight requires courage, patience, and a willingness to look honestly at aspects of yourself that you may have been avoiding or denying. But I want you to know that you are not alone in this process, and that every person who commits to this deeper work contributes not only to their own healing, but to the collective healing of humanity itself. This channel exists as a sanctuary for authentic spiritual seekers who are ready to move beyond surface-level approaches and engage with the real work of consciousness development. When you subscribe, you join a community of individuals who understand that true manifestation requires psychological honesty and emotional courage, and you gain access to ongoing guidance and support for your journey of integration and authentic empowerment. Each video I create builds upon the principles we have explored tonight, providing practical tools and deeper insights to support your continued growth and manifestation success. If tonight's exploration has resonated with your soul and helped you understand something important about your own manifestation challenges, I invite you to express your appreciation by clicking the like button, which helps ensure that this essential wisdom reaches others who are ready for this level of depth and authenticity in their spiritual practice. Remember that your personal healing and empowerment is not a selfish pursuit but rather a gift to the world, because as you become more authentic and integrated, you naturally inspire others to do the same, creating ripple effects of positive change that extend far beyond your individual life.